Well, good evening on the East Coast, and it's afternoon on the West. This is Dave Hagedorn from Evoke Neuroscience. I want to introduce you to the SympCheck, short for Symptom Checklist, where I've selected a handful of commonly used office screening tests for patients. We wanted to put that with the Evoke software as an option because it's very helpful to rather quickly, while you're gelling the head, have patients take a core battery of several tests that otherwise would be, more cumbersome if they did so in the office with paper and pencil, and you have to scan it into their EMR. And these items on the SympCheck, they self-score, makes it very clear what their severity is. You don't need to look those types of things up. And it's available as one of the added reports in your your physician's portal, where you can download it as a PDF. All of them are grouped together in one PDF to put into the chart. I use it a lot. I've used it for quite a long time, and it's been a nice, useful tool in helping identify the problems patients are having, especially when you have the subjective data from that and the objective data from the electrophysiology. It's a nice combination. So we'll talk about that today. And, just as a quick reminder, no symptom checklist, even though they have good sensitivity and specificity, and I'll show that, is used in isolation of other data when you're making clinical diagnosis, although it does certainly support it in a great way. So this is what the SympCheck looks like on your screen, on the software screen. You'll see this added icon here, and you can select or deselect the items. Now, a caveat, and I'll get to that when we get to the PSC-17, which is a pediatric screening scale. I'll make a specific point that you have to purposefully select it if you want it. When you enter the patient's demographics and their age, this will be grayed out if they're not within the age range that the test was designed for. So these tests are triggered by their age norms when you enter that into the demographic section for the patient. So this sample here in particular, this was an adult that I took a snapshot from the screen, and so that reason, this test was not available because they were outside the age range. So on the PHQ-9 is the first one, and I'm going to go through these in order. Again, the order is the PHQ-9, GAD-7, the PCL-C, that's the civilian version for PTSD, the DSM-5 categorization, which is just level 1. It helps you start to look at what categories of pathology they're having difficulty with, if any. The PHQ-9 is a very quick screener. A lot of doctors use it in their office. I don't recommend the shorter version. You really should do a minimum of all 9 items. There are abbreviated beyond this, but you miss some of the important nuances of the patient's responses. Any score that's greater than 10, an aggregate score of 10, has pretty good sensitivity, upwards close to 90% for sensitivity and specificity to detect major depressive disorder. And item 9 is of particular importance because that's your suicide item. So in our automated process, we flag that in particular if it's elevated so you don't miss it. And incidentally, in the NeuroRead report that processes, if you do these checklists, the NeuroRead report will isolate and look for that item and flag it as well in the narrative interpretive responses in the NeuroRead report. So we want to try to be wary and not miss a person who's potentially suicidal, and that item captures that. In fact, I saw a girl today that came down from New Jersey here to my office, North Carolina, and in fact, all the items in a PHQ-9 were pretty low, except the item 9 score was a 3, which is suicidal. And that, obviously got my attention, and we, are doing things to address that promptly. So it's a very simple 9-item test, and it's got a very strong reference group. It was studied with many thousands of patients amongst different populations, primary care, pain clinics, OBGYN clinics, with pregnancy, without. So it's also used for looking at postpartum depression, for example. And more recently, just in 2019, another paper was published looking at 29 studies that cover almost 7,000 patients. And again, they're also reporting very high sensitivity and specificity, was very high in these as well. So it's got a lot of reliability and a lot of use, and it's one of the ones I recommend for people. The HAM-D, the Beck, the MADRS, these are also very good additional depression screening tests. They're longer, they take more time. So that's why we start with this one, which is not very time consuming. This is what it will look like to the patient when they're looking at their screen, the Evoke system laptop screen. So they'll see the items. You'll notice, to help them keep track of which number they're on, you see a color variation in the horizontal bar from darker blue to lighter blue. And if they miss an item, like they forget to click on one of these buttons with their mouse, it will not let them go to the next screen. So you see here, this battery of tests is 11 pages. So it tells them how many pages they have to go. They see what page they're on. And after they complete these items, they can click next to go to the next page. It's also a very reminder, the instructions are on the screen as well. So your technician really doesn't have to do anything other than launch this while they're gelling the scalp and preparing the patient for their EEG. You can capture all this data at the same time. This is what a portion of the output looks like after the patient's done. So this is actually from the girl I mentioned that I saw today. And this I just happened to this is one part of the full page. So it's a PDF full page report. It says the name of the test, it has the references, it has the scoring criteria, and this is just one little piece of a single page output for this particular test, the PHQ-9. So you'll see here, we have a depression score number 2, which is quite high, and it's highlighted. You can see what their answer was very quickly, and I use this to go over it with the patient typically, especially in a case like this today. I'm seeing some hopelessness, and I'm seeing some thoughts about either hurting themselves or ending their life. And then other areas of the score are not so high. So her overall score is really in the moderate range, not severe, but because item 9 was elevated, we need to take it more seriously, and so we did that today. And anything really around outside this red line is to be, for us to take a closer look at. So kind of this red line was put in there on purpose to kind of focus your attention on the items that are more problematic. All right, and here's the second test that the person will see after the PHQ-9 items is the GAD-7, the Generalized Anxiety Score. This is a 7-item test, and this is what the test would look like if you had a paper and pencil version of it. And again, what we did was we just didn't recreate the wheel, but we just tried to make it easier for you to collect the data and have it automatically process output and scoring. And the cutoff here for this test was also found to be quite reliable in the high 80s for sensitivity, and the specificity is lower, as you would expect, because generalized anxiety is not so specific. You could have symptoms of anxiety disorders that are with panic. You can have some obsessive compulsive disorders, some PTSD. Any of those conditions can drive this score to be a little bit higher. This is what the patient will see on the Evoke's laptop. They'll see again the instructions over the last 2 weeks. How often have these things bothered you? And they just again simply click the radial button box. It's just a tap of the mouse on a particular response that they want, and then they get an output. A few things about the GAD-7. It's a score from 0 to 21. It's a short Likert 0 to 3-point scale, and it's either not at all for 0, several days for 1, more than half of the days, and nearly every day for 3. And it's also a pretty good tool, referenced well, several thousand patients for validity checking. And it's, again, used with more than one type of anxiety condition: panic, social phobia, PTSD. They have different cutoff scores, and any other type of anxiety disorder, you see, the sensitivity drop off a little bit more, and onto a level where it's less useful, which is why we don't just rely on a GAD-7, but we add the next test for PTSD, because I want to tease out if I think I've got a PTSD condition that's maybe not recognizable, which is common in adolescents and kids. It will look like borderline, it'll look like bipolar disorder often, and it'll be missed. It's very commonly missed, and that's why that is added. And in those cases, you'll see a pretty high score for PTSD, but a not so high score for the GAD-7, and that helps you with differentiation. And this is what the GAD-7 output looks like. So again, there's more to the report. There's references and things on the report, but the core answers are, what is the scale for scoring? The bottom left here, you'll see that. What was the patient's score? Again, this was that same patient I referenced in the prior example. So, really her highest score was irritability, which is common with depression, of course, also common with PTSD, irritability, and that was her highest score. Now the PCL-C is the civilian version and the older and more long-standing use version for looking for PTSD. There's the PCL-M that's used with military populations, but we also use the PCL-C with active duty and retired and veteran military members as well. And I have found when I typically see military patients, sometimes I'll give both the PCL-C and the PCL-M. But the PCL-C is very sensitive also to military as well. The items in the PCL-M are more combat related. It's a 17-item test. The paper and pencil version is here on your right as an example. And the PCL-C has more recently been replaced by the PCL-5. And the reason for that is the DSM-4 criteria for PTSD is slightly different than the DSM-5 criteria for PTSD. So the PCL-C5 is an updated version that corresponds with the ICD-10 and the DSM-5. It's not appreciably different, where you're not going to have any problems continuing to use the PCL-C, and many clinicians still continue to use that. In my work with the Veterans Administration, I typically will use the PCL-5 because that's what they're accustomed to now. But clinically, outside of the VA use and with veterans, the PCL-C has a long track record, very stable norms, and it's one that is included with the Evoke system for that reason. That said, we will be adding the PCL-5 as an option next year, particularly because of the large amount of U.S. military use of the Evoke system in much larger numbers and speed than we anticipated. So we're going to provide them the PCL-5, and we'll provide that for everyone else too. This is what the person sees when a PCL-C pops up. Again, you see, we're on page 4 on the bottom center. So the patient knows, how many more pages they have to go, what page they're on, the speed in which they're moving through this. I find that when you give these items plus the BrainCheck, which is standard, that's about the right amount of time it takes to gel the head. So the timing works out quite well for me, where they're done with this just about the time I'm ready to check the impedance on the screen, and I've got all locations gelled, the clavicle sensor, everything's set. So it reduces any time waste and gives you a lot more information in the same amount of time. So again, this is a very similar format, the question on the left, the radio buttons on the right. And then here's the output. And again, this is an example. I'm using the same patient across for all these just to demonstrate today. So this girl's score was 51, which is very high for an adolescent. 51 is in the severe range, especially when you see items like number 10, distant, cut off. It's almost disassociative in severity. And that's a hard thing to capture and detect even in an interview with kids. And for have a person respond in this way, it's quite useful. Irritability, again, is very high. Lack of interest in things you used to enjoy, that also loads on the depression score. Disturbing dreams of an experience. That's not something typical to generalized anxiety or to other anxiety disorders or depression. It's rather unique to PTSD. So what I wish I had included in this lecture is the girl's EEG, because in fact, all other conditions of the brain were normal except for the telltale biomarker of PTSD, which is elevated alpha-2 in the right parietal area of the brain relative to eyes open. Everything else in the brain was normal. The only abnormality was the biomarker seen for PTSD, which is high alpha above her peak alpha rhythm in eyes closed, right parietally, and central parietally and occipitally. And in addition to that, the Loretta sourced that frequency abnormality to the cuneus, which is part of the default mode network. So again, it was a pretty classic EEG analysis for pure PTSD with no other real causal pathology to her condition. And this subjective data was just more useful information to further support the objective physiology. The next test in the series is the DSM-5, the self-rating symptom scale. And this is a rather complex test. And it'd be very unlikely that you would use this battery in paper and pencil form in your office, mostly because it's complicated. There's different versions, there's different pages for age group. You see the different 6 to 11, 11 to 17, 18 and older. These are, and who's the reporting person? Is it the self? Is it a parent? There are many, many forms, and the output is 13 domains for adults and 12 domains for child and adolescent. So it's not an easy one to administer in its original normal paper form. So this one, to administer this in the SympCheck version really, really helps and make it a lot easier. So what you'll see here is, you'll get a good cross-section of the majority of mental health categories that plague folks and help you identify which areas that you want to inquire further or make a referral. You may say, refer to psych, and say, look, DSM-5 screening suggests the person has predominant somatic symptoms. They're seeing me for, me as an internal medicine doctor coming for, different vague complaints that don't seem to be fleshed out with our lab testing or exam and interview. And the DSM-5 rating is picking up somatic symptoms, and you want to make a referral to mental health for that, perhaps. So that's a useful tool to help guide your referral and guide the next person who's seeing your patient. I think they'd be very appreciative and quite impressed that you provided that legwork and some guidance from a mental health standpoint. This is what this questionnaire looks like. It's a much simplified version from what's typically seen in the paper and pencil. So it stays with the same format, and it changes. It's dynamic because based on the age of the respondent, the screen presents differently for them to match up the norms in a way the test was designed. So very simple again. It says during the past 2 weeks, how much or how often have you been bothered by the following? None, slight, mild. And because some of the questions are either answered as none or not at all, or slight, or also the same thing as rare, less than 1 or 2 days, you see both type of categoric definitions above those radio buttons. And this is what the output looks like on the left. So again, it is all found in a single page. So that's kind of a screen capture of the output that'll be in your report. And it looks pretty busy, but again, the same format. We see the gray item is what the patient's response was. There's domains. So there are these different, this is a child in this case, so there's only 12 domains. In an adult, there would be an extra domain, number 13, but because this example is with a 15-year-old, we're looking at just these 12 domains. And this helps you interpret the results. So you'll look for the 3s and the 4s, the categories that are high. So in this case, category 4, she scored a high score here, 3, a 4. That's a rather high domain score. And what is number 4? Depression. So you can see here that depression is high on your list. And secondary to that would be area 10. Interesting, 10 is repetitive thoughts. That's internalizing repetitive thought process. Could be obsessive compulsive symptoms, or even negative rumination. That's part of depression. But this guided a couple questions for me to rule out: is this disassociation, or is this obsessive compulsive type symptomology, where we have OCD as an added feature for this particular person? It also talks about these issues on use of alcohol, drugs at the bottom. Because a lot of patients, when you ask them flat out, when they're looking at you, they'll deny it. They'll minimize and deny. But generally, we get pretty good honesty when people are just sitting in front of the computer and answering these questions as they go through them. And the last item is, as I mentioned at the start, is unique to people who are adolescents, children and adolescents. So if their age is 18 or above, they're not. This item, the PSC 17, will not be flagged. And if they are within that age group, so let me go back to that, you need to purposefully select it. So what will happen in the software is, if the person is, say, age 15, as in this patient's case, and this one is not from her, but otherwise it would be dark, this will be highlighted in dark black, unlike the gray. So if the patient is within the age range, 4 to 17, this will be black. Now, what you have to do, and your technician needs to do, they need to purposefully click that box and add a check mark. Otherwise, that test will not be given. So that's all these are automatically just selected. You have to deselect them. But in the case of this one for the child, you need to purposefully select them. And let me tell you why that's the case. Because you will need to select, it's basically one extra step to alert the technician of, if it's a young child, then they'll need to inquire, have someone else fill in the answers for the patient. So let me go back and show you the age range again. So if they're under age 11, so if they're 6 to 11, the parent or guardian or whoever you have will be the one that completes this particular test. And it's also why it's one at the very end. So you can get them out of the waiting room to come to your exam room and fill this in. So it can be a foster parent, and you just select. You'll notice that mother's at the top. Generally, that's the most frequent alternate. It says other at the bottom, so when the person is doing self-report, it's just other. But again, very simple to answer the questions. Feels sad or happy, feels hopeless, and parents, in that case, if a younger child can answer it. But if they're older, they can answer it themselves. Okay, another nice thing about the PSC-17 is it gives you an idea about attention. So several of the items are positive for attention. So we use this to get an idea. You have a lot of people that'll come see us thinking they have ADHD. It's very common. There are so many conditions that mimic ADHD or ADD. Just because you have the symptoms doesn't mean that's the right diagnosis. In fact, in this particular patient today, yes, there's some inattention, but is that more likely due to the insomnia? Is it what you see with PTSD or the depression? It's really irresponsible to diagnose ADHD if you've got an active case of depression and PTSD, because the last thing you want to do is give a psychostimulant to a person with PTSD. So, but this will give you an idea about those the attention related and loaded questions, and then externalizing internalizing. These categories of symptoms are derived from particular test items, and you don't have to do that. The software does this for you. So your output will show you, of a more intentional problems, more internalizing or externalizing type problems. So internalizing like depression. And this is kind of what they look like. You can see these domains a little bit better. These are domain scores for attention problems. You can see the fidgety, daydreams, distracted, trouble concentrating. You can see how those particular items load more heavily for attention problems. And then scores of 7 or higher would be indicator as a significant indicator of difficulty with that attention domain. The depression ones are the internalizing scores, and then externalizing conduct disorders, things like that, fights with other kids, things like that are externalizing scores. So you can get a pretty good idea from what domain or what type of problems a person is having. Okay. And then there is what's called general. Now, general was because in the research report for some of those that was using that has some additional questions to help pull out certain features from the research report. As a person taking medications, have you had a prior EEG or a head injury? This has to do with the BrainDX database, and it loads, and these are questions that help identify categories from in use of that particular database. So it's only a couple questions, and that is layered in there as well for additional information, but it's not a particular test, like a standardized test like the previous ones. This is here, if you're curious about it, was just because of a BrainDX database requirement for pulling information from that reference group. And this is what those tests are. These are qualifiers that are necessary for the BrainDX. Okay, so that's pretty much it in the current version of SympCheck. There will be additional items that we will be adding to help add more richness to this, but we don't want to get out of control with too many. There are other ways of getting good information by neuropsychological testing by computer. CNS vital signs is perhaps my favorite. And they take longer to do a really solid CNS vital signs. you're looking at a good solid 40-45 minutes just to sit down for that. So it's really a separate appointment time in many cases to use that, but it also provides you a lot of information. So I do recommend that product if anyone's interested in that. You can reach CNS vital signs on the web. So that's pretty much it. That's the SympCheck in a nutshell. You can deselect all of these and just move on with eyes open, eyes closed. You can obviously, as always, these are optional based on your determination of what is needed for your patient. But in general, when I see patients, I will run the full gamut and get all the information at the same time, and everything's pretty much done. They're in and out of the chair in 40 minutes or so. Typically, it's about, at averages, about 40 minutes from the time they come back to the exam room and sit down to the time they're walking out to the front waiting area. So I hope this was helpful, and I hope to see you utilize it. And as always, you can contact support at evokeneuroscience.com or info@evokeneuroscience.com if you want more help, if you want some individual assistance with interpretation, one-on-one, Zoom meetings and the like. Our mission is to support you as you support your patient. Well, thank you all for your time, and feel free to reach out to us if you have questions or if we could be of further help to you.